On November 11, 1918, the Germans laid down their arms, finally ending World War I. In the surrender agreement, the Allies listed the numbers of cannons, machine guns, and other weapons that Germany had to turn over. Yet of 1,700 airplanes demanded, only one type was so feared that it was mentioned by name: the D-7. The deadly machine was the masterwork of a 28-year-old Dutchman who had become Germany's most skilled and unconventional plane maker, Anthony Fokker.
The way Tony Fokker got on in life was to have his eyes open for ideas that could work, for birds that could fly.
You get even from the sense of photographs that here is a supremely confident individual. You see this sort of young, really young fellow, and he's smiling at you. He knows what he's doing when he gets into that pilot's seat in that plane.
At a time when aviation was in its infancy, Fokker was quick to take the controls. Over the years, his planes flew faster and farther, setting new standards in the air. But his feet never touched the ground.
Fokker was definitely a rule breaker. He didn't always follow the mores of society.
He was enclosed in his own mental world. If he had the idea that someone would not fit in his world, they would be out. All that counted was building airplanes, being successful.
Fokker's desire for success propelled him to the height of aviation and made him one of the most famous industrialists of his time. In 1903, the Wright brothers became the first people to fly an airplane. They didn't go very far. The flight lasted just 12 seconds, but its impact was felt around the world.
Flight was something that touched at a very deep, resonant chord within the human spirit. Flight enabled us to get above the ground, to look back at the earth, to see where we were, to see who we were, to explore frontiers. And so for that reason, it was very evocative.
The idea of flying was very heady. It gathered immense crowds. To have an airplane up there, this is exciting stuff.
Among those dreaming of flight was a Dutch boy named Tony Fokker. Though he had never actually seen an airplane, he was determined to build his own someday. And he made a model of the Wright brothers' machine to try to figure out how it worked.
From the perspective of a young guy like Tony Fokker, it didn't have much to do with high tech, with calculating things. It had to do with ideas. How do you make an airplane? What kind of material do you use? How do you get an engine?
In 1910, Fokker went to Germany, where he began courses in aviation. Within months, he began building his first airplane, using his new skills and his father's money. The plane was finished before his 21st birthday. With supporting cables that spun out like webs, he called it the Spider.
The Spider monoplane, it's bare bones. There's practically nothing there. And what you think when you look at it is, this is flying at its most exposed.
But Fokker was fearless with his new airplane. After he built the Spider, he flew it himself. And his talent in the air helped him improve his designs.
He was a damn good pilot. Fokker could get in an airplane and say, oh, it needs a little bit of that, fine-tune it here. And in those days, wooden aircraft, you could very quickly change something.
Fokker didn't have this academic angle to him. Any new engineering books that reached him, he would throw them out of the window because he said, I don't need that, I go on experience.
Over the next 2 years, Fokker continuously enhanced his Spider, adding an enclosed cockpit and producing a 2-seater version. By 1913, he established a small business near Berlin making airplanes. His main customer was the German military, which was preparing for war. But even though armies across Europe were buying up planes in an escalating arms race, no one knew exactly what to do with the relatively new invention. One possibility was to use the crafts for reconnaissance, to scout enemy troops and weapons. Germany's rival, France, had developed an agile monoplane for just that, the Morane-Saulnier. With a keen eye on his competition, Fokker purchased a damaged Morane, took it apart, and studied it.
And this is a case where we really see the classic Fokker in operation. He looked at this machine and realized, I can do this better.
There's no question that he copied ideas from other people, and he acknowledges it. There was no crime.
Perhaps this is also his true genius in not only copying ideas of others, but in adapting the ideas to the effect that they would work better than the original creators had made them.
Fokker took the Morane and added a metal frame, making it stronger and easier to maneuver. His new airplane, called the M5, impressed the Germans and was recognized as a sturdier version of its French counterpart. When World War I began in August 1914, German orders for the M5 came pouring in. Fokker expanded his factory and staff to meet the growing demand, and he developed a unique willingness to experiment with new ideas.
Fokker was a person who was always willing to try something. No matter how crazy the idea, let's try it. Build an airplane with 10 wings. Try it, build it, get it up there. He gave it a shot.
They're continuously trying to combine ideas that they see during the war into products that could work. If you count how many different prototypes they build, it's almost as if they come up with a new aircraft every 2 weeks.
As Fokker's business grew, so did his wealth. He acquired a taste for the luxurious and the exotic, and as his riches swelled, his eccentricities made him hard to keep up with.
Fokker ate dinner at midnight, and then you went to his house at 2 in the morning for an engineering discussion that went till sunup.
He was a very, very difficult boss to work for. He would seldom give praise. He would always criticize. And working for him, you would never be sure what his next move would be.
But Fokker was more interested in building airplanes than pleasing his workers. And he wanted to gratify his biggest customer, which was pressing him for innovations. By 1915, neither side had built an airplane designed to attack in its most lethal form. A plane that could shoot forward without hitting the propeller. A few designers looked for creative solutions, but none of their planes were effective in combat. A French pilot named Roland Garros found a way around the problem without quite solving it.
Garros comes up with this primitive idea of putting channel deflectors on the propeller blades, so when the bullets hit the blades, they would simply bounce off and fly in other directions.
So you didn't shoot off the propeller, but every once in a while a bullet would hit the propeller. It's not an ideal situation, and if you're up in the air and you boing, boing, you know, it's probably pretty scary, and I don't recommend it.
Garros quickly scored 3 victories with his new contraption, but his secret lasted just 18 days. A lucky gunner shot his plane from the ground, forcing him to land it in German hands.
The Germans said, so that's what Garros is using. There's only one man in Germany who builds planes like this, Anthony Fokker.
Just as he had done with the French Morane, Fokker studied and perfected the gun's design. He developed a system that allowed the machine gun to fire through the propeller in synchronized bursts without ever hitting the blades. Once again, he had taken an idea from Germany's main enemy, improved it, and turned it against them. The Eindecker, as it was called, was the first true fighter plane, and it instantly transformed the war in the air. From late 1915 through the following spring, the Germans ruled the skies in Fokker's planes, shooting down dozens of defenseless Allied aircraft. The terror became known as the Fokker Scourge. And while Fokker's name instilled fear in his opponents, his success put him in hot demand with the German pilots.
The German pilots who fly his airplanes all like to talk to Fokker.
He flew as well as they did. He could talk the same language. Fokker liked pretty women. They did too. You know, they had a lot in common.
These pilots, they enjoy being with him, and he likes sharing ideas, so he listens to the pilots. There's this very interesting interaction.
Fokker was a shrewd man. He wanted to know his customers. He also wanted to make them feel good and like him. And so basically, he would pay for their trips from the front to Berlin. He would wine them and dine them and get to know them and schmooze with them, basically.
But far from the parties in Berlin, soldiers on both sides were dying in horrifying numbers. Though Fokker profited from the war, he gave little thought to the reality of life in the trenches. Even a trip to the front would fail to illuminate him.
Going to the front in the First World War for him was like a tourist outing. There's film footage of him inside a ruined British tank, climbing about and sort of, well, playing the tourist. Well, at the same time, people are dying all over. And it shows the strange disconnected way in which Fokker's mind works. For Tony Fokker, war initially was something of a technological battle between two powers. And all the rest of it, what actually happened with the products between 1914 and 1918, only mattered on a secondary level.
For Fokker, war was business, and his business was soon under attack. By 1916, the Allies developed their own synchronization guns, and his German rivals were building faster and more nimble airplanes. Less than a year earlier, Fokker had made the most sought-after aircraft. Now, his planes were unfit for combat.
Early aviation was replete with individuals who had one good idea and never moved beyond it. And Tony Fokker was at the point where he could have fallen into that trap. And here's, I think, where we see him seize once again upon what's going on and turn things to his advantage.
Fokker noticed that one of his German rivals was developing a new, internally braced wing that was thicker and stronger than most designs at the time. He recognized it could revolutionize aircraft. Fokker used the wing on a new triplane he developed, called the DR-1, which he began pitching directly to German pilots. Among his first customers was Germany's famed flying ace, Manfred von Richthofen, known as the Red Baron. Richthofen adopted the plane and flew it with deadly success, helping Fokker win back his prestige as a cutting-edge designer. But though remarkably agile, the triplane was difficult to fly, and only the most skilled pilots like Richthofen could master it. Fokker needed a simpler airplane that was just as lethal. He went back to the factory and began designing a biplane that combined the best of his ideas as a plane maker and test pilot. It had internally braced wings and synchronized machine guns, and it was easy to fly, even for novices. It would become his best and most notorious plane yet, the D-7.
Why was the Fokker D-7 good in battle? Well, you put it all together. One, it was very maneuverable. And the thick wing made it possible to practically stand on its end like this, you know, with the nose in the air and go after somebody.
The thick wings enable it to operate at altitudes up to 20,000 feet effectively, which means if a Fokker chooses, it will always have the height advantage over you.
It had very well harmonized controls so that the pilot could concentrate on flying the mission, not flying the plane. This is an aircraft that is a genuine killing machine.
When it made its debut in the spring of 1918, pilots on both sides were stunned by the abilities of the D-7. But Fokker's plane arrived too late to rescue Germany from defeat. When the armistice was signed on November 11th, the German military was dismantled, and the notorious D-7s were confiscated. The end of the war left Germany in a state of anarchy, and Fokker feared his business could be swallowed by revolt. Yet he was determined to keep his empire intact. He gathered as many planes as he could and secretly loaded them onto 6 trains bound for his native Holland.
How in the devil do you sneak 6 freight trains with airframes, engines, factory parts on them? What you realize is he seems to meet adversity without missing a beat.
The outrageous scheme worked, and Fokker used the smuggled goods to rebuild his business in Holland. Still just 28 years old, he was ready to start his life again. In 1919, Fokker married the daughter of a German general, Elisabeth von Morgan. The two planned a life of leisure, using the wealth Fokker had amassed during the war.
The idea was that they would sail the world and have a wonderful life full of fun and travel for as long as they pleased. Of course, it all went differently. He would have breakfast with his wife in the morning, and the next time she saw him could be 2 months later. And there was no warning in between, like, oh, I'm going on a business trip, because he would simply forget to mention it.
Before Elisabeth realized what was happening, Fokker was pouring his energy into his business, not his marriage. In 1923, the couple divorced. 2 years later, Fokker moved to the United States, where he adapted his business for a new era of aviation. In the 1920s, planes once used for war would now move people across the globe. For the first time, the public would enjoy the benefits of flight. And as usual, Fokker was quick to catch on to new trends.
He is not a leader of the technology, but he is a tremendous integrator of what is taking place. More than this, using basically the same human relations approach he took in the First World War, in the 1920s, he gets very close to the headline-making aviation personalities of the day.
In 1926, Richard Byrd took a Fokker airplane to the North Pole, becoming the first person to fly to the top of the world. In 1928, Charles Kingsford Smith began a 2-year journey in a Fokker F-7 that would make him the first to circle the entire globe in an airplane. And that same year, Amelia Earhart made the first of her daring trips across the Atlantic Ocean, also in a Fokker plane. Fokker had done it again. He was the leading aircraft maker in the world, and everyone could see it.
It looked to the spectator of the late 1920s, witnessing all the successes of Fokker aircraft, that this was an airplane constructor who had unlimited possibilities. The first signposts of Fokker's decline are not really all that visible, at least not to the outside world.
Although Fokker's planes sold well, he continued to build most of them as he had a decade earlier, with wooden wings. After years of leading in new designs, Fokker wasn't keeping up. And while his competitors were pouring resources into new ideas, Fokker was distracted by his personal life. In July 1927, he married a Canadian woman named Violet Ostman.
Tony Fokker, having seen the end of his marriage several years before, was really ready for a new commitment. At least that's what he thought. He recognized all the things in Violet that he found important in women. She looked up to him, she admired him, she put him on a pedestal. He was her big hero.
The two settled in an apartment on Manhattan's upscale Riverside Drive. But almost as soon as they wed, their marriage began to fall apart.
He was always playing the act of being Tony Fokker.
Mr. Fokker. Ladies and gentlemen.
And he craved this public image, the effective, successful businessman, the funny man with a strange accent, the eccentric multi-millionaire. He was never the person Tony Fokker. And in a loving relationship, you cannot play the role all the time. You need to be there as a person. And this was something that he simply could not do.
Violet began to suffer from depression. And in December 1928, she checked into New York's Presbyterian Hospital, where she remained for 6 weeks. Fokker rarely visited her. On the day she left the hospital, he sent his driver to pick her up. When Fokker finally got home that evening, he was preoccupied and went right to sleep.
Violet realized, this is my life. This is the rest of my life. This will never change. He will never be there for me. And in this moment of utter despair, she does the ultimate thing and steps out of the window. The moment that Violet stepped out of the window of their apartment on the 15th floor was something of a moment of revelation to Tony Fokker. Up to this point, he had been the public image of himself. But here he had failed utterly and completely, and he knew this was his doing, and he never got over it.
After Violet's death, Fokker began to withdraw from his business and sold a large stake in his company to General Motors. Then, in 1931, a Fokker airplane carrying the legendary football coach Knute Rockne crashed near the small town of Bizarre, Kansas. Investigators blamed the accident on one of Fokker's trademark wooden wings, which cracked in midair.
The death of Rockne was a headline-getting event nationwide, even worldwide. What that does is it destroys any potential future market for Fokker aircraft air transports in the United States.
The Rockne crash convinced the public that Fokker's planes were unsafe. Meanwhile, the streamlined planes that his competitors spent years developing were ready for market. These all-metal aircraft were safer than wooden planes and easier to maintain, and they were built by well-trained scientists using the latest technology.
What we see happening as we get into the 1930s is we see more and more that aircraft design is being driven by the products of the new schools of aeronautical engineering that are emerging. And Fokker starts to become, for the first time in his life, technically distant from this.
He had really outlived the stretch of time in which tinkering, so to speak, could produce business success in aviation. The tinkering days, the days in which the test pilot dictated what the outcome of a technological process in aircraft development would be, those days were over and done with.
In 1935, the man who had defined an era of aviation was forced to step down as head of his own firm. One day, in December 1939, Fokker checked into the hospital for minor surgery to treat a sinus condition he developed during his days as a test pilot. But the surgery went awry. An infection spread through his body and knocked him into a coma. He died 3 weeks later in his hospital bed. He was 49 years old.
Fokker was that individual who's blessed at just their moment in history. Too early, he would have been like many other pioneers who simply would have lacked the technical resources to make their dreams of flight a reality. And born too late, he would not have been able to put his foot in the door.
In his 1931 autobiography, Fokker allowed a rare moment of reflection.
My life has been paced by the airplane. Hurtling through space on what now seems a predestined course, I had no idea what that course was. Sometimes I sat erect in the cockpit, giving the impression to the world that I was calmly guiding my life. Most of the time, I merely hung on.